Victoria's withdrawal from the 2026 Games has been met with shock and disappointment here in the UK. Team England released a statement saying its athletes already had its sights on the 2026 tournament, and this news was hugely unsettling. The Commonwealth Games Foundation has its headquarters here in London. Its chief executive has been highly critical of the Victorian government.
Absolutely shocked that the cabinet has made this decision and it hasn't come back to the board to actually have a proper conversation. You know, this is a major setback, but we will be working as quick as possible to replace Victoria as 2026.
Now, towns and cities in the UK are being encouraged to come forward and bid to host the 2026 event. There's been some speculation that Birmingham could repeat its 2022 success and host the Games again.
One of the problems in the last 20 or 30 years is that the Games have rotated between a sort of golden circle of Australia and England and Scotland, and if you're going to have a Commonwealth Games, they've got to go to other places as well. You know, the idea is to try and get it to share the love a bit around the world.
Have these games become too big and too expensive?
Perceptions of them are certainly too big and too expensive. When you look back to the early games, they were almost like a county fair in many respects. Yes, when they started in 1930 in Hamilton in Canada, they built a stadium, but people stayed in a local school, in dormitories. The expectations were so much less then.
Scotland's First Minister has said the government would consider hosting a portion of the Games in a multi-city arrangement. Meanwhile, the UK's Prime Minister says he hopes that Australia and the Commonwealth Games Foundation can find a solution. He's rejected the notion that this shows the Commonwealth's fading influence.
Isabella Higgins in London. Now, Bendigo is one of the regional cities that was to have hosted the 26 Games, and news of the cancellation has come, not surprisingly, as a huge disappointment. Greater Bendigo Mayor and Chair of Regional Cities Victoria, Andrea Metcalf, joins us from there now. Andrea, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Michael.
What's your reaction?
Look, I will say we were shocked and disappointed when we heard the news yesterday morning. We were very excited to be hosting the Commonwealth Games here and across regional cities, and being able to be on a world stage to show what is great about working, living and playing in our regions.
What do you make of the Premier's argument that it will simply cost too much for every Victorian, including yourself?
We didn't have any of those costs yet of what it was going to cost us as councils. We were certainly keen to know what they were going to be, but we didn't have any detail about that. You know, there will be some that will be really, you know, say it's an embarrassment for the country, but then there's others people that will say it's a decision that was made, a right decision to be made in times of budgetary constraints.
Well, where do you stand? Do you think it's an embarrassment, or do you go for the budgetary restraint line?
Personally, I would go with the budgetary constraints line. I'm conscious of costs when it comes to that governments incur at whatever level it might be, and at times we actually have to make decisions not to proceed with things as quickly as our communities would like. So I'm comfortable with the decision that the Premier has made.
Are you also pleased that the government is going ahead with a $2 billion spending package on cities like Bendigo? You'll get in Bendigo some new basketball courts, an upgrade to the showgrounds. Still, even though the games aren't happening, will that help out? Is that a bit of a, I guess, nice consolation prize?
It is, and you can probably see me smiling. We're very pleased to know that there is that $2 billion commitment to the regions. There is that commitment to 1,300 new social houses across the regions. The infrastructure that we were expecting to get as legacy items, we're still going to get, and so will the other cities. So we're all comfortable with that aspect of it. From a regional cities perspective, when I've been in touch with the mayors, we see it as our role now to hold the government to account to make sure that that spending happens sooner rather than later.
In terms of local athletes, how disappointed are they? You're clearly in touch with all the local sporting clubs and sporting associations.
Yeah, look, I'm sure they'll be disappointed. You know, we had Alyssa write to the Deputy Premier about having the cycling here and was very excited when it was announced that this, indoor cycling was going to happen in Bendigo. You know, Charlotte Sexton is a young netballer from Bendigo. We interviewed with her a little while ago out at the stadium, and she was talking about that opportunity to play in front of her own family and friends here in Bendigo. So I have no doubt they will be very disappointed.
OK, disappointed. Listen, I know Bendigo's a great city. It's a bit of a blow. So give us your elevator pitch, Andrea. You've got a national audience watching. Why should people visit beautiful Bendigo?
Oh, well, even in winter, we have beautiful weather here. The sun is shining right now. Our art gallery is the most visited regional art gallery. We have our heritage trams, we have beautiful architecture, we have our underground mine, the list goes on. And of course, we do have the biggest imperial dragons in the Southern Hemisphere right here in Bendigo. And one of them is an international treasure, not just a national treasure. So we are well worth visiting.
Yeah, absolutely well said. Andrea Metcalf, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Michael.
The former Queensland Premier Peter Beattie was the chairman of the 2018 Games held on the Gold Coast. He joins us now from Sydney. Peter Beattie, let's put your former Premier's cap back on. And you were approached by your bureaucrats saying, gee, Premier, the Games that we were going to be holding on a budget of $2.6 billion have blown out to $6 billion, possibly $7 billion. What would Premier Peter Beattie do?
Well, I'd have a heart attack to begin with, and then when I recovered, hopefully in emergency, I'd want to know why. Let's talk about budgets. I don't know the detail, Michael, of the Victorian circumstances, but I need to make 2 points. One, our budget in Queensland was $1.2 billion for the Commonwealth Games. Queensland government insisted on us sticking within that budget. We did that. We were innovative about how we dealt with the challenges, and we returned about $100 million to taxpayers at the end of it, so we were within budget. The second point I need to make, Michael, is this: it is difficult to run major events in regional cities. Even the Gold Coast, which is Queensland's second largest cities, had enormous challenges. It's easier to run these events in Melbourne, Brisbane and Sydney. There are extra costs to run them in the regions. But the key to it is, once you get a budget, you've got to stick to it. And that is difficult to do, but it is absolutely essential. Otherwise, these events will go by the way. Was it a mistake, therefore, for the Victorian government to focus on that regional model for hosting the Games? Look, I'm a strong supporter of the regions. Events need to be in the regions if we're going to grow Australia, but you need to factor in right at the beginning there are extra costs. And you'll remember the Gold Coast, there's a lot of challenges. I mean, the Gold Coast is a long strip city, if I can use that term. There's a lot of water involved. There were big challenges in closing off roads because it affected restaurants, it affected local residents. You had to build additional facilities. There were a lot of facilities on the Gold Coast, fortunately, but there are 3, if I recall correctly, that had to be built. We needed extra seating for the opening and closing ceremonies. There are an enormous number of challenges, and we needed to be innovative about how to do that. In major cities, you have transport corridors already there. You have stadiums that are already there. So whenever you go to regional areas, there are additional costs. Now, I don't want anyone in regions to get angry with me about that. That's just a fact. It doesn't mean you ignore them, but you have to factor that into the cost structure when you agree to the deal. Now, all the other premiers over the last 24 hours, Peter Beattie, have been running away from the prospect of hosting the 2026 Com Games as if it was a piece of political kryptonite. But in your view, though, what Australian city would be best placed to take up the cudgels? Well, there's 2 things here, Michael. Firstly, I hope the Commonwealth Games survive because they are a family-type event. There are more para-sports there. There are more events actually at the Commonwealth Games. There are events at the Commonwealth Games that aren't at the Olympics. There's a great opportunity and a lot of women's events. Para-events, as you know, were incorporated into the program itself. But if you look at Australia, the one with the deepest pockets and the strongest budget position is Western Australia because of iron ore exports, but they've ruled it out. So, Michael, if you want to have my humble view about what has to happen here, with only 3 years to go, I think it has to go back to Birmingham because the infrastructure's there, the organising committee is just been disbanded. And again, if you look at the countries, Canada's not really interested, There was a chance of it going to South Africa, to Durban. That didn't work. So realistically, unless it goes back to Birmingham with only 3 years to go, the only other global countries in the Commonwealth that would be interested, I think, or possible, would be India or Malaysia. And I think with 3 years, they wouldn't put their hand up either. There's only one hope, in my view, for the future of this Commonwealth Games in 26 is go back to Birmingham.
And just finally, before you go, do you worry there might be some nerves on the international stage about Queensland's 2032 Games, Olympic Games?
No, I don't think so, Michael, and the reason's very simple. This is like chalk and cheese. The Commonwealth Games, or the Federation, doesn't put money into the event. That has to be funded by the government in the Commonwealth Games. With the Olympics, they put a lot of money in. There's hundreds of millions of dollars they're putting in to actually run the event. The state has to put money into the infrastructure, but that's there for future generations. So it's chalk and cheese. Money comes from the Olympics, goes into running the event. That doesn't happen in the Commonwealth. So totally different. The cancellation of the Commonwealth Games in Victoria will have no impact whatsoever on the Olympics in Queensland.